warmer than it's been lately, though, so I'm attributing the large turnout to the warming weather. My name is Cheryl Banks. I'm the Communications Manager at the Cleveland Heights University Heights Public Library, and I want to welcome you to tonight's public forum. Is Northeast Ohio a sanctuary region? Laws and policies. Where does our region stand on immigration? This is part of a partnership series we have with the League of Women Voters, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have you all here tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Kahlil Seren. I'm a Cleveland Heights City Councilperson. I guess probably this is Cleveland Heights, so you guys will let me know if you can hear me. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me, both the library and the League of Women Voters. I am probably here simply because I introduced some legislation, Ordinance 106, 2017, which regulates how the city involves itself here on the local level in immigration policy.
Hi, my name is Lynn Tremonti. I'm the Deputy Director of America's Voice, and that's a national pro-immigrant advocacy group. I also direct a project in Ohio called America's Voice Ohio. I'm originally from Medina County. I live now here in Cleveland Heights, and I'm just so excited because usually we've done a lot, Farhad and I and Elizabeth have done a lot of panels together, and usually they're in Oberlin or Akron, so it's really nice to be home and to see you all. Thanks for coming.
And the big plus is she didn't have to drive too far through the snow, both ways, barefoot. Uphill. Thank you. My name's Farhad Sethna, and in the flyer it says simply Immigration America. Well, Immigration-America is my website, but I'm a private attorney. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Akron School of Law. And I'm proud to call Professor Knowles my colleague and friend, and she will be here momentarily as well, as we understand. So I'm really looking forward to this panel. Thank you all for being here. It's a great subject. As we know, it's a very hot-button topic today. We don't know from day to day and actually hour to hour what this administration is going to do. And sometimes I think they don't know what they're going to do themselves. So this is going to be an interesting evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. And now we have a pause without a moderator. So we have decided we're going to do a polka in the front for you all. Okay, so I'm just going to start up by saying a little bit about what we think is going to be helping us. And here's Professor Knowles herself. And what we think is going to be helping us this evening, really, as you know, is you've got your little cards and a pencil. It'll really help us all if during the presentation, even if you have questions, write them down on the cards. And at 8 o'clock, I believe we're going to be stopping our presentation, and we're going to be moving on to the question and answers. We'd love to have your Q&A, and I'll try to moderate, help moderate by pulling up the questions and sort of sorting them out and maybe passing them to Professor Knowles. So if anyone has questions, please do write them down. We want to take the advantage of having you all here. And some of what we say may be very basic, sort of immigration 101. Some of it may be a little more advanced. We're going to try to keep it to a level where we can all learn and understand. And finally, in closing, I just want to say very quickly, I recognize two of our students from the University of Akron School of Law who are sitting right here in the front, and we're very proud to have them here. They're also members of Professor Knowles' legal clinic at the University of Akron. Very fine young ladies, and they themselves have tried immigration cases even though they're law students. So we're very proud of all these young people coming together and learning how to work together to make a better tomorrow, especially when we're faced with the topic of making America or keeping America as great as it once was. So with that, Professor Knowles.
Thank you very much, Attorney and Professor Sethna, for that great introduction. My name is Elizabeth Knowles. I am a professor at the University of Akron School of Law. As Attorney Sethna pointed out, I do supervise an immigration and human rights clinic at the law school. These two fine students, Sarah and Serena, know how to get extra credit, as you can see. They did not tell me they were coming to this presentation tonight. And just to pick up on what Attorney Sethna said, they did try immigration cases in immigration court last semester, and this semester they're working on Board of Immigration Appeals. So they're taking it to the next level. There is so much to cover in the topic of immigration law. What you see in the media just barely scratches the surface of the complexity of this field of law. In the time that we have here tonight, we'll only be able to do this very same thing, scratch the surface. We'll just try to scratch around on the surface as broadly as possible. There are some topics that I picked out for this evening that you've been hearing a lot about in the media that we'll discuss. I think the nice thing about having a group like yourselves of individuals who want to be informed, who want to have the facts and know what it is, what context to put the media that they're seeing every day into. I think one of the great things about that is we can give you some foundational information in the law, and you can take that back and apply it to what you're seeing and hearing every day and judge for yourselves, make an opinion, an informed opinion about what is happening in the community and the world around you. So with that, we will dive in. I think probably the most news-covered immigration topic in the national media right now is what the fate of a program called DACA will be. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Let me just point out right away that it is not a form of lasting relief for anybody who receives it. There's no path to citizenship. There's no path to permanent residency. There never was. Basically, what DACA did is if you met the criteria as a young person who was getting an education or had graduated from high school and met all of those requirements, you were basically taken off of the ICE enforcement radar. And you were allowed to have a work permit and work lawfully here and not have the fear every day of getting in your car, being pulled over, and being detained and deported. So I just want to clear that up right away. It was never a lasting form of relief. It still is not. With that, let's ask some questions about what it is, what happened to it, and what's happening to it now. So we know that the policy was rescinded by the Trump administration on September 5th of 2017. But just days ago, Judge William Alsop of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California issued a decision saying, well, we're not going to rescind it nationwide. I want to look to the panel now and ask, what are the consequences of this decision? Where are we at right now?
Can I back up just to ask, do people know?
Please do, yeah.
Like what a dreamer is, or do we need to explain?
Yeah, let's get some audience participation here.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you know what a dreamer is. Okay, I'm going to pick at random, and I want a really good answer, okay? I'm just kidding. Put your hands back up. Don't be scared. Okay. I just really love your scarf, so I'm going to pick you. What is a dreamer?
I think it's a young person who was brought here when they were very, very young, and they have never known any other country but this one. But they are still technically and not, they're still an immigrant, an alien, and if they have no papers, then they're undocumented alien.
Okay, that's a darn good stab at it, and pretty much.
Who brought them here in the first place? Us. Did they all come from one place?
So she's asking who brought them here in the first place, and we'll get to that. The answer varies. The answer varies. Sometimes they came with family. Sometimes they came over by themselves, unaccompanied. Okay, so we've gotten some feedback from the audience about what society, what the community thinks a dreamer is. What is a dreamer, Lynn?
Okay, no, that's absolutely right, and I just wanted to make sure people understood that. I'll repeat it again, but it's an immigrant who came to the country as a child and grew up in America, knows no other home, but doesn't have their legal status, doesn't have their papers. And, I don't know if there are any dreamers in the room who'd like to talk about the experience, but for many, they didn't even realize that that there was something different about their legal status from their peers until it's time to get a driver's license or it's time to apply for student aid. Others, of course, remembered the journey, or it's talked about in their families, but I just wanted to make sure people kind of had that in mind. So it's really people who grew up here and are as American as any of us who were born here. But so I can answer her question, but I think he has a question, but do we want to take that now, or do you want to do the...
Let's get into the substance,
substance.
of
Can you write it down? Okay.
and we'll have the Q&A session after, if that's all right with everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Professor Knowles' question was related to a lawsuit that is allowing people who had DACA to reapply.
Right into the microphone, please.
That is allowing people who had DACA to reapply. It's a very temporary window for people to reapply because Trump has already canceled the program, and this judge has said that he doesn't think that that was lawful, and so he's opened it up again. But the Justice Department is going to appeal, and they're going to skip the Ninth Circuit. They're going to go directly to the Supreme Court, where they know they have a more favorable court. So, the injunction could be, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just talking like I know what I'm talking about. But basically, the ability to apply the Supreme Court could cancel that at any point in time. It's a small window, and the bottom line is that over 120 people are losing their DACA status every day right now. When it comes to March 6th, which is the deadline for everybody to have it be canceled, it's going to be more like 1,000 people a day. And so I just want you to think about what this means. So it's a piece of paper that says you can work legally, but many folks, they've given it to their employer, they're working above board, they're paying taxes and stuff, so their employer knows when their DACA expires. They're going to lose their jobs. If they lose their jobs, they can lose their homes. If they have kids, they don't know how they're going to take care of their kids. And in a lot of families, the person with DACA has become, in many ways, the primary the primary organizer of the family. I mean, of course, the parents are there always, if they have parents, but when it comes to driving places, the DACA beneficiary is the one who drives the parents around because it's less risky. Having the more stable job is the DACA recipient, maybe making more money. So you're jeopardizing not only the ability for a young person to fulfill their dreams, but also just their ability to take care of the family in the way that they are trying to. And let me just say one more thing. I don't want to talk too much, but the thing that's so infuriating about Trump and others playing around with, well, it's not really expiring until March, this, that, and the other thing is sort of like, first of all, I mean, there's already people, like I said, 14,000 people who've lost their work permit. They had it and they lost it. And then it's like, how do you live your life knowing that it's a countdown? One dreamer I know said he feels like he has an expiration date on his life. How do you, and there's other contexts where this is the same, being terminally ill. There's other people that are sort of dealing with this sort of a pressure, but this is something this doesn't need to happen. It doesn't have to be this way. And, there's solutions. We'll talk about the solutions. There's lots of support for a legislative solution, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. So keeping this topic tied to our region and our state of Ohio, let me ask, how many individuals have benefited from DACA in Ohio?
I believe the number is around 5,000 have benefited from DACA, but around 13,000 would be eligible at some point. One thing with DACA was that you had to be 16 to get it. So there's younger dreamers. And you saw that horrific case of the young woman with cerebral palsy in Texas who was arrested as she was getting her surgery. She was 9 or 10. She's an example of a younger dreamer who would qualify for DACA once she turned 16. But because she doesn't have it now, they did that. So the DREAM Act legislation that's pending would allow the younger dreamers to apply now for their status. They don't have to wait until they're 16.
And it's important to understand that this decision by Judge Alsop in San Francisco, by issuing that order, he wasn't saying everybody can apply for DACA now. It was only the people who already have it could reapply for it. So it wasn't like DACA was up and running again. It is not. It's just open right now for individuals who already have it. It's open for them to reapply. And in the decision, the reasoning behind that, the judge said that the party that was asking for the relief, the UC schools, didn't show any harm to anybody who didn't already have it. So that's why the judge made the decision that way for now. It's interesting to note that USCIS had to act and give some guidance in order for this to get going. So all the immigration attorneys around the country, while this happened on January 9th, there was nothing that anybody could do in the days until some guidance came out. But it was actually on a Saturday, on the 13th, that USCIS had moved and got a document out on the website saying, yes, we're going forward with this. Now, I'm curious to know, now that this appeal is going to be filed, what kind of an administrative nightmare is ahead for the processing and possible halting of the reprocessing of these renewals? Professor Attorney Sethna, do you want to comment on that?
It's interesting you say that because as soon as that order came out on Saturday night, I actually started emailing clients and telling them, you can apply for DACA. Come and see me on Monday. And we've already put DACA applications together for those people who are either have lost their DACA already or who are in the process of going to lose their DACA very soon. And we're trying to get those applications assembled and filed as quickly as possible. As Lynn just said, there's a very small window. And with this administration, we don't know when that window is going to be closed. You have to realize now that the Supreme Court consists of 4 and 4 and one possibly leaning toward Republican justice. So we've got possibly a 5-4 margin at the Supreme Court. There is a good chance that the nationwide injunction that Judge Alsop created is going to be wiped out. And if it's wiped out, it's only a matter of time if it filters down through the Supreme Court as to when USCIS is going to shut the door once again and say no DACA applications. With regard to Professor Knowles' question, it's a great question. It is a nightmare because I'd like to imagine that applications that are filed and that are in process ought to be finally adjudicated, especially if a fee has been taken. It's possible, however, that USCIS is simply going to take all these applications and sit on them for the next 10 days to 2 weeks until there's some clarity on the issue. Because there is no way to force USCIS to make an immediate decision on any of these DACA applications. So it is going to be a nightmare. Unless we have clarity from the Supreme Court, we're all literally still up in the air.
Thank you. And I just have one last question about DACA, and we're going to move on. We could talk about DACA all night into tomorrow, but we won't. Judge Alsop's decision came at a very curious time. It was issued in the midst of negotiations happening in Washington, D.C. over a suitable immigration bill, including what was going to happen with DACA. Since that date, we saw the tweeter-in-chief declare that DACA is probably dead. How do you interpret that?
Okay.
If there are multiple ways.
Yeah, multiple personalities. That's how So when Trump canceled DACA in September, he said, we will replace it, and I love the dreamers, and, you know, it's a blah, blah, blah. Fast forward to last Tuesday, he had a bipartisan meeting in the White House, and he it was televised, and this was in the middle of everybody saying that he was mentally unfit to be president. So he wanted to have the TV cameras there for an hour to show that he could handle himself for an hour. So he went off again and said, I love the Dreamers. I'm going to sign a law of love. I trust the people in Congress, the people in this room. Get me a package and I'll sign it. It could even be a clean dream act without a bunch of other stuff that I've already said I wanted. I don't care what it is. Just get it to me. Let's get this done. Thursday, a bipartisan group of senators brings a package to him that was Dream Act, border, and a few other things that his staff had asked for that he'd asked for. And he, not even knowing what's in it, shockingly rejected it. The problem, there's a couple problems with him. I think if it was just him, he likes that positive publicity. I think that he would want, he understands that signing DACA would be pretty amazing for him, or signing the DREAM Act, or he can see that. He got some really good press when he was talking to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer for a while, and he was really happy about it. He's got staff, but I mean, I don't trust him. I'm not saying I trust him. I'm just saying that his instinct would go that way, I think, even though he campaigned opposite. But he has staff who are using all of their tentacles within the Department of Homeland Security, Justice Department, and then within the White House itself to control him. And they undermined, Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin were going in on Thursday. They undermined what those guys were doing. They called and made sure Senate Republican opponents like John Cornyn were waiting there at the White House, just randomly sitting there when Graham and Durbin got there. And so the deal got scuttled because Cornyn won't, he's a sneaky person and he didn't want it to happen. So I can't really remember the question other than, how do you interpret the tweets? And then with the DACA is dead thing, it's setting up the blame game. You know, he wants to say, well, Democrats wouldn't agree to something. But the fact is, right now, the only people who've said no are the Republicans. And there's a big effort going on at this point. So the Graham-Durbin bill is going to be introduced in the Senate as an actual bill. In the House, there's a bipartisan bill as well. It's a package of DREAM Act plus border security. Neither package is what we were asking for. It's got some stuff that the immigrant community does not like. But it does include the Dreamer legalization. And so people will have to make a decision where they come out on it. So now what we're trying to do is figure out how do we get those bipartisan pieces of legislation, how do we force them to be voted on? And people are using different tactics trying to get it attached to the government funding bill that's coming up. And, you know, just trying to force the hand because the Republican leadership in both chambers does not want to bring it up right now.
Okay, thank you for that. Attorney Sethna, do you have any other comment about that?
No, I don't, actually. Let's move on to maybe the next topic.
Okay, so the next topic is about ICE policies. We have a lot of community members here tonight who want to know more about how and why ICE is detaining and removing or deporting individuals who've lived in their communities for many years, often decades. A question I'm often asked is how were they able to stay here for so long to begin with, and why are they all of a sudden no longer able to stay, referring to the non-citizens who are being detained and removed. What has changed under this new Trump administration? We'll break these questions down and answer them little by little in the time that we'll allot to this topic. So first, many of the changes that we're seeing stem from a series of executive orders issued by Mr. Trump in January of 2017. How did these executive orders affect ICE enforcement policies as we see them now?
Well, it has completely changed the landscape. And I'll go back to what Lynn said earlier. I'll go back to what Councilman Seren said a little while ago about the legislation. We are seeing a complete and tremendous sea change in the way that the agencies are applying the law. And I mean applying the law, not applying regulations or applying policy, applying the law. Where previously we had laws that were being interpreted in a way that was favorable to aliens, or at least gave aliens the benefit of the doubt when possible. Now we are seeing laws being applied to their fullest, harshest extent. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, we don't need new laws on the books. Congress works overtime in this country. In fact, I wish they'd actually go back to being citizen farmers and come to Washington, D.C. only 2 months in the year. We would be much safer and better off if they did. But unfortunately, they work professionally as politicians for 12 months of the year, absent, of course, during the breaks that we pay for. Given that scenario, we have enough laws on the books already to deal with immigration. We don't need more enforcement. We already have enough enforcement. What we are seeing, in a quick answer to Professor Knowles' question, is we have seen a sea change from my perspective as an attorney in the way that rules are being applied, whether it's entry to the United States, remaining in the United States, family immigration to the United States, business immigration to the United States, asylum law, or naturalization. We have seen a complete change in the way that the laws are being applied. And none of these ways, let me assure you, are favorable to the alien or accrue to the benefit of the alien or give the alien the benefit of the doubt. None of them do. Everything has become a hard-handed, heavy-handed policy against any kind of benefit to the alien.
What about these instances that we're seeing in the news of long-time community residents who have U.S. citizen children that are being removed, and they've been here for many years? What gets an individual to that point?
Okay. I'd like to start this. I've worked on a number of those cases this year. When Trump was elected, I had a list of people, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to leave these people behind. They're all gone. They've all been deported. So what happens is, he said he was going to go after bad guys. Well, guess what? So was Obama, okay? What Obama was doing is he said he wanted his agents to focus on the bad guys. So if somebody was here for a long time and had American children and hadn't done anything bad and was, you know, they had to meet a lot of criteria. It wasn't a giveaway. They could get an order of supervision, which means the government keeps track of where they live. They have to come in every year to meet with the government, make sure they haven't committed a crime. And in exchange for that, they can apply for a work permit and work legally. This is part of prosecutorial discretion. It's been used for decades in different contexts. John Lennon was the first person to benefit from deferred action in the United States. So it's been around for a long time, and there's lots of people like this. So what happened was the agents and Trump, under Trump's direction, when they threw out all the prior Obama memos, they said, it's a free-for-all. Go do what you want. And so what are you going to do if you're an ICE agent? Are you going to go out to a drug den and somewhere dangerous and risk your life? Are you going to sit in your office and go through your Rolodex and say, oh, Pedro's supposed to see me in September. Maybe I'm going to get him to come in August. And you just call them in, and they walk in because they're the rule followers with the American kids and the most to lose, and they come out with a deportation date and an ankle monitor, or they don't even come out. And I don't know if you guys saw the case of the businessman in Youngstown. He's been here for 30 years. He had a green card. Oh, okay, you know him. He had a green card. He lost it because he didn't understand that if you live outside of the U.S. for a certain period of time, you'll lose your green card. There are a lot of other complications in his case, but he has employed hundreds of Americans. He's been here for 30-some years. And Congressman Tim Ryan just has gone to bat for him over and over again. He got a temporary deportation stay unexpectedly a week ago. And then this week when he went in to meet with ICE, you know, just as like a status conference to see what was going on, they put They put him in handcuffs and took him away in front of his family. He didn't even get to say goodbye. This man is not a criminal. And so this is when the boss says, you know, we're talking that these people are rapists and criminals and inhuman, then the agents feel like they can do whatever they want. And I can't wait to talk about the sanctuary stuff in Ohio, because I want you to know what the field office director in charge of our region thinks about that and is doing about that. So we're actually living in, Ohio is one of the hardest places to be undocumented in the entire country.
Kahlil?
You know, I don't have a great deal of expertise on the federal level dealing with these issues, but I did want to at least express something very briefly that stems from my experience with federal agencies, just as a sort of in a general way, not specific to immigration enforcement, and also my experience with politicians. You know, as one, I get to, and also someone who works for quite a few politicians in my day job, I can recognize some of the pressures that are placed on politicians in terms of their expectations of favorable viewing by their constituents who are increasingly gerrymandered and also increasingly polarized. But then in addition, the federal agencies, and you could probably speak to this as we you know, move forward and think about Ohio specifically, but I know that federal agencies find ways to pervert the idea of judging performance by data. They are exceptional at doing this poorly. And one of the ways that you can see this in evidence is the results that you get and then the data that they're showing when they talk about their performance. And I think in this circumstance, what you see is this path of least resistance to get whatever numbers they're being held to, because I am absolutely certain that these agencies are being held to get this numbers. You've got these goals for the month, you've got these goals for the year, et cetera. And the path of least resistance, and you see it across federal agencies, the path of least resistance is not generally the best prescription for the public. So I just wanted to point that out as a pressure that federal agencies are under, and that is apart from whatever personal animosity any particular agent might have or ideology that any particular agent, I'm not speaking to that right now, but those pressures to get this quota or that quota or reach these goals may also be inhibiting sort of the quality of the pursuit. You know, if you're talking about going after the bad guys, and what you're doing is deporting a man who has actually contributed to our economy and our society, then you see that their priorities are in the wrong place. And the same goes for politicians. If their priority is to appeal to a base that has decided something not based on data, but instead based on, you know, saying things like they are illegal over and over again with no real conception of what that means, then what you're doing is addressing the wrong priorities. And instead of addressing the priority where you need quality policy that is enforced in a fair way, what you're getting is reactionary policy that is enforced in a reactionary way.
Thank you very much for that. Yes.
I'll just add one little thing, one little point to that. It's very eloquently spoken, Councilman Seren. I'll build on what Lynn just said earlier, too, and say this. From what I am seeing, from my perspective as an immigration attorney in the trenches day after day, accompanying my clients sometimes to Brooklyn Heights, which is our nearest ICE office, ICE is going after the low-hanging fruit because it's easy. It makes it look nice so that in the night on some news channel, the newscaster can say the administration has removed 200,000 people. That's 3 times more than the Obama administration removed in the same period of time. That's what they're doing. Our streets aren't getting safer. MS-13 members are still in this country. Okay, the gang violence we read about in Maryland and Washington, D.C. is still going on. What they are picking up here in Ohio is your landscaper and your cook and your person who works in the little mom and pop grocery store down the road. Removing those people is not making America safe. It's making America less safe because those people are the backbone. They buy the homes, they buy the cars, they pay a lot of the taxes as well, just like you and I. So keep that in mind. They're going after the low-hanging fruit because it's easy to do so.
I'm just going to make a couple of comments about enforcement before we move on to our last topic, which is about sanctuaries and welcoming cities and practices and responses by the community. My students and I have sort of a unique perspective of being in the detention centers. Oh, sorry. My students and I have sort of a unique perspective of being in the detention centers on a weekly basis and seeing how people got there. And I always ask them when I see a new group, well, why were you arrested? Why are you here? How did you immediately get to this building? And in that way, I'm able to see how the face of enforcement is changing locally or in the state or a couple states away. And what I'm seeing more and more of are people who are going to pay a ticket or people that are checking in for a probation appointment. There's somebody waiting for them. The ICE attorneys are the ICE officers are there waiting for them, where they're taking care of their civic responsibilities out in the public. So that's happening more and more, where they're just sort of in the shadows, in the easy places, like Attorney Sethna said, getting the low-hanging fruit. That we're seeing a lot of. And in January, when the enforcement policies came out, one major thing that was in one of the executive orders was it made parole, which is the only mechanism for conditional release for people who come into this country seeking protection, like asylum. It's the only way for them to get out of detention while they're going through proceedings. The executive orders made that on an emergency basis only. So people who, not criminals, who were coming in seeking protection, fleeing persecution, were stuck in jail. And that's still in place. And I think people started to learn of that, and we stopped seeing people arriving at our borders seeking protection in the large numbers that they used to. But I can tell you that they've started to come back again, and every time we're out at the Youngstown Northeast Ohio Correctional Center or at the Cuyahoga County Jail, I have a new group of 45 to 65 men sitting there in front of me saying, you know, we just got here last week from whichever country because we're afraid to return. So just to give you an idea of who's coming into the detention centers here in Northeast Ohio, there are 4 of them, in case you didn't know. There's one in Butler County, Seneca County, Cuyahoga County, and the big Youngstown prison. All right, let's move on to our third and final topic tonight about sanctuaries. I'm not even going to ask my questions. I'm going to ask your questions about sanctuaries. So let's just dive right in. First, I'm just going to ask the very basic question, and if we could just get a quick response on this so I can get into the other questions. What is a sanctuary city? I know that's mean. I said I want a quick response, and you can't give me one for that.
You should take.
Okay, I'll try to take this one. Frankly, obviously, the real answer is there's no such thing. There's no definition that is universally agreed on. So I'm going to give you the definition that I've decided on. And in my view, a sanctuary city is one that not only seeks to not proactively assist in mass deportation on the scale that we've seen, but also seeks to resist mass deportation on the scale that we've seen, even to the point potentially of breaking federal law or state law. That's how I've chosen to see it, which also allows me to tell people that my legislation is not sanctuary city legislation. I think that there are probably some nuances in there. I think that we could potentially decide that the resistance to some degree is enough to be called a sanctuary city, but since there is no really universally agreed upon definition, I've chosen to take a sanctuary city just a step farther than my legislation.
Okay, please, this is from the audience. Please explain the difference between sanctuary and welcoming cities. Are there any sanctuary cities in Ohio?
Good.
Councilman?
All right. So last year, Cleveland Heights City Council, we were discussing becoming a welcoming city. We were approached by a refugee resettlement organization asking us to declare ourselves a welcoming city to provide them with some municipal support that would enable them to receive more funding and have more resources to resettle refugees. We thought this was a great idea, but what also cropped up in that discussion was a bunch of people, activists, who came to us and said, hey, this is great, but you guys need to go a step farther and become a sanctuary city and proactively, resist the mass deportation, the I would say discriminatorily enforced mass deportation that's going on in this country, and sort of resist not only just the activity, but also resist the ideology underneath the activity. And in that discussion, there was a lot of fear on council, and some of that fear is reasonable. The landscape was really uncertain. We didn't understand whether or not this would result in the loss of funding for programs that we find important. We didn't know whether or not we could be held liable based on various pieces of legislation that are in play at the state level. These sorts of things, it was uncertain. And as a result, in the course of that discussion, we determined that we would be a welcoming city, which, I don't know, I'm all for the symbolic, I guess, but sort of a gesture. I would call it a gesture. Being a welcoming city is a gesture. And that's not to take anything away from a good faith, welcoming gesture, and the addition of the support for resources for a resettlement agency was also a cherry on top of that. But it, in my view, and I said it at the time, I didn't believe went far enough either. I tend to err on the side of a little bit of boldness. So the sanctuary city is one that actively and sort of substantially resists the activity of a federal government that is behaving in this way. And a welcoming city is a gesture letting people know that sort of as a general rule, we as a community don't share the values that are being expressed in this immigration policy.
Okay.
I'll just add one quick comment to that, which is it's very catchy to say we're going to be a sanctuary city or a welcoming city. But the bottom line is, what are the laws that you're putting into place to make it sanctuary or welcoming? Otherwise, your word is just like a tweet. And we all know what those tweets mean. Okay? Nothing. So if you're going to have a sanctuary city, or indeed a sanctuary state, as we have with California, you've got to enact legislation which is going to somehow put a curb to the ways that Department of Homeland Security is enforcing removal legislation. That may be by setting up a legal fund for aliens who are detained, by not informing ICE about the identities of aliens who are detained, by actually taking the extremely bold step, as in California, of determining that no misdemeanor will have a sentence of 365 days. Instead, all will have a sentence of 364 days. Why? Because federal law says if you have a sentence of 1 year or more, it becomes, in certain instances, an aggravated felony or a removable offense. So if you can play these sort of counter games on the chessboard, if you will, of DHS policy, then you are truly becoming a sanctuary city. You don't need to call yourself a sanctuary city and incur the wrath of somebody in the administration. You can do these things even without calling yourself a sanctuary city. The proof, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, is in the pudding, correct? Okay, it's not how the pudding looks, it's what's in the pudding. Let's make the pudding a nice one.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question. Could sanctuary policies, this is from the audience, could sanctuary policies be established with a ballot initiative?
Yes, certainly. It is always the prerogative of the residents, the citizens, the voting, the electorate of a community to, get petitions signed, put something on the ballot, and we can all discuss it, and then vote on it as a community. The other option, of course, and this is the one that I've introduced, is that the elected representatives of a community can put something in the code, and I want to make it clear, the residents of this community, the electors of this community, still have the option to take that to a ballot as well. So I know that I'm going to get into some inside baseball here, but Cleveland Heights has a habit of passing things on emergency, and the sort of the function of that, or at least the purpose of that ostensibly, is that we want something to take effect immediately. That also has a side effect of sort of exempting it from referendum. The legislation that I've introduced does not include emergency language, so it is not exempted from referendum. There's still the 30 days to get your signatures and get it on the ballot. So if a majority of Cleveland Heights is not interested in the legislation that I've introduced, even if council passes it, the residents, the citizens of Cleveland Heights still have the option to take it to the ballot, put it to a vote it down. Have that conversation in the public sphere and vote it down. But aside from that, if the legislature of a community has not put something at issue in this way, the residents of that community still have the option to put something on the ballot and change their code.
Okay, I have two more questions related to sanctuary, and then I'm going to ask some of the other questions that came from the audience. All right, localities have been considering whether to be sanctuary or welcoming. What power does ICE have to punish them? Are mayors vulnerable to arrest for cooperating? Two questions. All right, so what power does ICE have to punish localities considering being a sanctuary or welcoming? Ms. Tramonte?
Okay, I'll try, and then others can jump in. So the administration has been trying to punish cities that call themselves sanctuary or that do not facilitate deportation of people simply because they're here unlawfully. They have not been successful. A lot of their attempts have been challenged in the court, and the courts have sided with the cities. So now what they're doing is they're retaliating by threatening raids of workplaces in the locations that are sanctuaries. There's possibly going to be raids in Northern California sometime soon, and the explicit goal is to punish California for being a so-called sanctuary state. Are local officials liable or criminally liable? No. Ohio, last session, I believe there was a bill, no, you know what, they never introduced it. It was a female House member from Cincinnati area was going to introduce it. I can't remember her name. And it would have made people criminally liable if an immigrant in their jurisdiction went out and did something bad. If they had declared themselves a sanctuary, Josh Mandel was, he used that as his sort of intro for his campaign, his Senate campaign. But the bill was never introduced. So there's these bad ideas out there that so far they haven't been introduced. There is something in Texas. There was a law that passed called SB 4. And that is similar to the Arizona Show Me Your Papers law. and it's all related to the sanctuary stuff. It's all about what questions police are asking people in their daily jobs. And in that law, they actually tried to make police not liable for breaking the law, like the Constitution, as a way to get the police to buy into it. Because, of course, you can't do that as a state, but they were basically saying they were worried about constitutional challenges of unreasonable search and unlawful detention. So they told the police, we will make sure that you're not liable for any of that. So, you know, people, and again, this is supposed to be the party of the Constitution, whatever, but just monkeying around with it because their goal really is to just have this like blanket of steel. And I would just gotta say one more thing because this is Cleveland Heights and I've gotta say it. This is, I think, all about keeping people down so that they know their place and just keep their heads down, do their jobs, take care of our kids, mow our lawns, pack our meat, and if they, you know, if they get deported tomorrow, if Johnny gets deported tomorrow, there will be Freddie ready and wanting the job. And so I think it's so immoral. It's not about, they always want to have this conversation about the law and what the law is and following the law because they don't want to talk about what they're doing to actual human beings. And I just have to say that because I know you guys will get it. And yeah.
So this last question about sanctuary follows up. First, just a quick one. Somebody said, again, they said an emphasis question. Are there any sanctuary cities in Ohio? Just real, and which are they?
No, there's no sanctuary cities. There are some cities that limit police interaction with ICE. Oberlin, Lorraine, Cincinnati has some limitations. Columbus has some. There are some. East Cleveland actually has actively decided to cooperate with the federal government to deport people because they wanted to move up in the chain to get some DOJ grants. And what I wanted to tell you guys is that the ICE director for Michigan and Ohio, she reports she has no problems working with any police in Ohio. She's like, thank God, it's not like those other places. There's a lot of cooperation going on. The Highway Patrol works hand in glove with the Border Patrol and ICE. And, you know, thank God Cleveland Heights I don't think is doing it, but I don't know if it's been tested, and maybe you know that. Yeah, like, do you know?
Well, I'm actually very curious about getting the big scoop from Lynn because she said earlier that she was going to talk something about sanctuary cities. So I'd like to hear what she has to say since she's obviously on a roll right now.
Oh, no, I mean, that was it. I'm just a nerd. But, like, when her name's Rebecca Aducci, and you need to know her name. She's an evil person. When she said with a smile, I have no problem with any police agencies in the state of Ohio, sent chills down my spine, right? Our police, instead of patrolling for criminals and enforcing traffic laws, are helping the federal government deport immigrants. The other thing you might not know is that we're a border state, but because there's not a lot of illegal traffic coming through Lake Erie, right? There's not Canadians swimming across Lake Erie to get into Ohio. The agents are sort of focused in the interior. They patrol the turnpike. They pull cars over just because it's multiple brown people in a car. They say they're checking for smuggling. They're not supposed to be enforcing traffic laws. Like I know you don't know this. This is happening 30 miles from here, and they're allowed to do that. So that's why I say Ohio is one of the toughest states to be undocumented in. We've got full police cooperation, very little civic support. Thank you for stepping up, but very little. Even the city of Cleveland has not been great. You've got East Cleveland saying we want to deport people, and then no driver's licenses, and then you've got active Border Patrol in the northern region. I mean, just for people trying to work.
So this question follows up on, I'm sorry, Councilman, were you going to add to that? Okay. This is a question about police. This is from the audience, and it says, all Ohio public officers take an oath to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States. How does a public officer ignore such an obligation by affirmatively disregarding federal immigration laws? Can public officers lawfully engage in civil disobedience?
If I'm just going to briefly address this from my perspective. There is no obligation on local police to enforce civil immigration law, to enforce no obligation whatsoever in our laws that our police are required to enforce civil immigration law. In fact, in some instances, the things that they are being encouraged to do violate the Constitution and put them and us at risk of being held liable for violations of people's civil liberties. Immigrants, whether documented or not, are also afforded the same civil liberties that we all are. Freedom from unlawful search and seizure. These sorts of things, people are, the extension of detention beyond when someone would normally be let go for an actual crime, a criminal act, that's against our Constitution. And so in a certain respect, some of the things that we're asking police to do is follow the Constitution, uphold that oath. So I recognize the question, I get it, and frankly, I'm all for cooperation between law enforcement agencies. I am a graduate of the FBI Citizens Academy. I am very well versed in that way of the sort of the intersection between federal law enforcement agencies and local law enforcement agencies. Federal law enforcement agencies aren't, they're not this massive, sort of monolith of agents that can, swarm. They cooperate a great deal with local law enforcement, and it's important that they do, because we're all on the same side on this. We don't want people who are making our society unsafe to continue making our society unsafe. Nobody's on the other side of the house on that one. But when it comes to enforcing civil immigration laws at the federal level, there's no obligation, and in fact, the way that these things are being enforced actively harm our society. They actively harm our community. And I mean, the Youngstown example is just one very clear example, but it's just one of many. And that's not something that at least that's not something that I think our community values in its local public servants.
All right. I'm going to ask just a couple more questions. I think we're running out of time. What is our 8:30? Okay, good. We're doing well then. Okay. This is sort of a smattering of topics, and I'm going to ask our panel. Some of them I found interesting and entertaining. Let's see. So this one I'm just going to ask very quickly. It says, "Where are all our young people?" They're in the front row. Don't you see them? Okay.
Answered.
That was good. All right, we've done that one in record time. Moving on. This one I want to take some time with. So the first one is straight away. What's the fee for the DACA application, Attorney Sethna?
Well, I should be ashamed of saying this, but we just filed it, and I think it's something in the range of, it came to $495, including the biometrics fee, which is a fancy name for taking your fingerprints and running it through the FBI database, okay? So the $495 is the filing fee for the DACA application. So that's what people have to come up with, because Uncle Sam doesn't do anything for free, as we know very well.
That's right. And then the question beneath that, which is the one I want to spend some time on, is, and it's a variation of the question, why don't they get in line? Why don't they apply for citizenship at the same time as a work permit?
Well, let me just take that one, because I practice immigration law, as does Professor Knowles. And the fact of the matter is this, ladies and gentlemen, please understand this. I'm going to stand up a little bit because I get very passionate about this.
Yes.
There is no law on the books today that allows a person who is undocumented to simply vault from that undocumented status to becoming a U.S. citizen. It doesn't happen. It can't happen. There are processes in the way. For someone to become a citizen, they must first be sponsored either by a family member or by employment, or secure immigration through asylum, or as a special immigrant, or as an investor or entrepreneur. There are no other ways, no magic wand to give someone immigration to the United States. Once they become immigrants, they come onto a status called permanent resident, LPR, legal permanent resident. They've got to get that so-called green card. They've got to have that green card for anywhere between 1 year for people who are in the military, 3 years, or 5 years for other people who are not in the military before they even become eligible to apply for U.S. citizenship. And my good friend and honored colleague, Attorney Bill Rossner, is in the back. He's practiced immigration law for a great many years. In fact, he's sort of one of the pillars of immigration law here in the Cleveland area. He's done countless cases, and we know as practitioners, you can't just vault from being a non-immigrant to becoming a citizen overnight. It's even more difficult for those people who don't have documentation, because if you don't have documentation, you can't even become a permanent resident to start with in order to accrue time for your citizenship. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, there is no way in the books today for someone to simply vault from non-immigrant status, much less from undocumented immigrant status, straight to U.S. citizenship. It cannot be done.
Which is why it is such a huge deal for the politicians in D.C. to be talking about making a path for permanent residency for those DACA eligible individuals, because there currently is not one. There isn't a path, just as Attorney Sethna pointed out, for anybody who has deferred action. It's not a legal status. It also highlights just how important and powerful, even having that is not a legal status, that protection, how important it is, how treasured it is for those individuals who have it, not just for them, but for their families. Okay. I'm not going to ask that one. Low-hanging fruit, where I'm going to read this I can't read that handwriting. Basically, who are the low-hanging fruit? How are they becoming the low-hanging fruit? And I'm thinking, Attorney Sethna, if you could expand on people who maybe had final removal orders before. We're seeing that a lot with ICE. They're coming and picking up people who had orders of supervision. Ms. Tramonte talked about that a little bit, about orders of supervision. But we're seeing that happen en masse now. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, most certainly. Thank you. The low-hanging fruit is this, ladies and gentlemen. It's people who are easy to catch, okay? And it could be someone who's already, as Professor Knowles said, already has an order of deportation against them. Well, they now have an order of supervision, meaning they are in the United States on the mercy of the Department of Homeland Security. Or it's someone who already has filed an application for asylum and their case is pending in the immigration court. Or it's someone who may have perhaps been driving without a license and they get caught. It's someone who may be taking their child to the doctor and they get caught because at the hospital someone turns them in. These are the low-hanging fruit. It's easy for ICE to identify them. It's easy for U.S. citizens or someone who's disgruntled to finger them to ICE, and ICE is then going to pick them up. Those are the people who are the easiest to access. Are they the people breaking the law? If you're talking about civil immigration law and the fact that they are in this country without papers or they've overstayed their visa, yes, they've broken the law. Let's not make any bones about that. I'm not going to be sitting here and crying about the fact that they haven't broken the law. Yes, they've broken the law. The question is, as Americans, do we provide a basis for mercy and redemption, or do we pick on the poorest of the poor and the weakest of the weak? That's a question that you are all here to ask, which is why I commend you for being here. That's a question we have to answer with a resounding no, that as Americans, we don't pick on the weakest of the weak. We don't pick on the poorest of the poor. We want our tired, our huddled, our poor masses who are yearning to breathe free, because you all came from someone who was in those tired, poor, huddled masses, who got off that boat on Ellis Island with maybe nothing but the clothes on their back.
Thank you. I have a question here. This one I like. It says, I'm very entertained by this. Why would anyone go in for the ICE appointments? Yeah. Why would they? Knowing what we know?
Well, it's super simple. I'll probably let Lynn answer more on this, but I'll just say one thing. You go in for the ICE appointments because you don't want to become a fugitive. That's why. Because what happens when you become a fugitive? Here's Lynn to tell you more.
They come to your house, they arrest Uncle Joe, they arrest people in your neighborhood, they will hunt you down. They love it. Some people have decided to stop going to their check-ins and go into sanctuary instead. Is there anybody here from Forest Hill Church? Great. Thank you for what you guys are doing. They have a woman, Lenore Garcia from Akron, living in their church, waiting it out, fighting her case. But she went there because she knew that if she went back to her check-in appointment, they were going to deport her. She's got 3 or 4 kids. Her husband was already deported. She's an amazing woman. I've known her for several years. And while she's in sanctuary in Cleveland Heights, and she has an ankle monitor, they know where she is. The agents from the Brooklyn Heights office went over to her home in Akron where her children were living. The eldest child is 19. She's taking care of the younger ones. And pounded and pounded and pounded on their door, scaring all of them. There was nobody in there they could deport. They had done their damage to the family already. They were just doing that to scare the kids, so they would call their mom and say, I'm scared, and their mom would feel bad and change her mind and go out of sanctuary. This is happening all across the country. So I'm sorry, I think I got into a different topic, but
That's fine.
why are people going into your check-ins? Yeah, so there's 4 or 5 people in Ohio who've decided to not go to their check-ins and are living in churches instead. Northeast Ohio is the leader. There's Akron, Mentor, Cleveland Heights. A few other churches are looking at it. There's one woman in Columbus, and I believe, I'm not sure about Southern Ohio.
Okay, thank you. A large amount of immigrant detention is operated by private prison corporations. That's right. What role do private prisons play in immigration law, considering private prisons are major lobbyists in the U.S.?
I'll make the councilman take this because it's something to do with the public funding. So
Yeah. Councilman?
Okay, so when we created a system that included the profit motive, we brought into our collective experience a motivation that doesn't necessarily put sort of the quality of human existence or the dignity of human existence at its heart. Now, I am not, to some degree, I'm a capitalist. I think that capitalism has facets that are very important to the advancement of human civilization and how we interact. And there are reasons I think that someone could reasonably point out some benefits of capitalism, but there are certain things that I think maybe create a more difficult situation when you introduce the profit motive. One of those things is things like law enforcement, things like even sort of military defense, things like privatization of prisons. When the business model it works better when you have more people who are detained, then the motivation isn't to create a situation where you have fewer people detained. And having more people detained has never been a recipe for an enhancement of human dignity or an improvement of our collective experience here on this planet. So what you have is a group of individuals who own private prisons, and these individuals benefit from laws that increase the populations of their prisons. So this is, you know, an enforcement of those laws that increase. So you get things like mandatory minimums, you get reductions in rehabilitation efforts, you get, you know, a whole slew of policies that basically accrue to the benefit of the shareholders or the owners of those private prisons. And I mean, as we've seen, I mean, in Ohio, I mean, look at our state legislature is, I would say, not balanced, certainly not balanced in the same way that our population is in Ohio. And part of that has to do with a concentration of wealth and sort of lobbying power that this particular issue is included in. And so I mean, that's how we fund our politics here, I guess. I don't know. Nobody's giving me any lobbying dollars, I'll put it that way.
All right, so sticking on the theme of money, what is the economic impact of enforcement of immigration laws and the economic impact of the fate of DACA?
I will say this to you, that this debate has been going on for the last 2 or 3 years very strenuously, especially since the DACA came out. Hundreds and hundreds of economists have banded together. Numerous studies have been done. Numerous papers have been published. All of them unequivocally say that immigration helps our great nation. Immigration increases the tax base. The DACA kids are putting huge amounts of money back into the economy. Many of them, as they come of age, are buying cars, are buying homes, are buying durable goods and products. All of those reflect into real jobs for real workers. And they are in the process of making America even greater. So it makes no sense at all to cut off our economic legs by deporting the younger, stronger, hardworking people who are actually going to commit to paying into our Social Security Trust Fund and our Medicare Trust Fund and making it stronger for generations to come. I don't see how a supposed self-proclaimed billionaire is going to create jobs and grow the economy when you dispense with one of the most important factors of production, which is labor. You can't kick out labor and hope to improve a country's economy. Lynn, your thoughts?
I can't top that or add to that. I do have a study from the Center for American Progress that estimates that passing DREAM in Ohio would lead to 10,000 Ohioans being able to get legal employment and would grow the GDP of the state by 92 million. So that sounds good. And since we're running low on time, could I make a couple plugs?
Please,
Okay.
plug away.
Okay, I'm going to make a couple plugs. So the good news is there's some people in the audience tonight. If you care about this and you want to be active, there is a lot you can do. So here's 3 things you can do. One is you can join my Facebook group if you want to stay on top of the news and different activities, call-in days, events, forums like this. You can join that. There's a group called Organizing for Action. Rachel, do you want to stand up? You can see Rachel over there. They have an ability right now for you to from the comfort of your own home, run a phone bank for just an hour of your time to call people, to call the members of Congress to support the DREAM Act. She claims it's really easy to do from home. So see her. And then Kathy Flora, where are you? Are you still here? And then Kathy Flora, do you live in Cleveland Heights or Shaker? Okay. Yeah, maybe you guys know her. So she's with Friends of Ola. Ola is a grassroots immigrant group based out of northeastern Ohio. Friends of Ola are people supporting them. And you can see Kathy afterwards. They are visiting congressional offices next week. They're just showing up. It sounds like a lot of fun. They're calling it Ola Blitz. And again, their goal is about passing the DREAM Act. And they always need more people. So there's a lot of ways you can get active. You can do it from your home. You can make phone calls, write letters. You can get updated so that you know when to do what and what to say. You can get connected to me. If you want to take it a step further, you can volunteer with Friends of Ola. You can get in touch with Rachel. So, there really is a lot that you can do as a citizen or even a resident or anybody who cares. You can make a big difference.
I do have just one more set of questions here about TPS, which we haven't talked about. This question is, TPS is being canceled, El Salvador and soon Honduras. How many people are affected in Ohio? Do we know?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a lot. It's not a ton in Ohio.
Okay, and then where do Portman and Kasich stand on TPS? Do we know?
Before we get there, just in case anybody doesn't know what that stands for, is it temporary protected status? Is that it?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
So just quickly, it's a temporary status that was given to nationals of countries that were experiencing a very massive crisis, such as a hurricane in Haiti, and then if you deported people back there, it would be chaos. So they get TPS. But what happened was there were so many crises in Haiti and El Salvador and Sudan and Syria that it kept getting extended, and so people had babies and got jobs and put down roots here, and now it's being canceled country by country, and people are having to figure out how to reimagine their lives that they've built for 20 years back in Haiti or whatever. So there is a legislation push on that as well. And if you join my Facebook group, you can work on it. But there was something I wanted to say. What was the thing about? We were talking about how many are here.
How many affected by TPS being canceled in Ohio residents?
Oh, Kasich. Okay, Kasich and Portman.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where Portman stands. I don't even know where Brown stands. But Kasich wrote an op-ed with Jeb Bush Jr. It was in the New York Times last week, where I was kind of surprised. They actually included not only the DREAM Act, but TPS. I think that was more of a Jeb Bush Jr. thing than a Kasich thing, but nevertheless, it was in there. And they were making the point that I just made, which is that, we're talking about people who've built lives here. Why disrupt it and say that they have to go? The administration could give them deferred action if they wanted to, even if they don't want to have TPS. They could let them stay. Congress can pass a law, so there's options.
Great. And we are just after 8:30 now. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having us here tonight. I want to thank our wonderful panel.
Is it possible, can I just make a really brief statement that I think there's something that I feel needs to be addressed before we exit, and I'm scared that we're not going to. Is it okay?
Well, since you put it that way, yeah.
Sounds intriguing.
So, okay, I know that not everybody who voted in Cleveland Heights in 2015, in November of 2015, voted for me, right? I'm aware of that. I know that there were people who did because they heard me, speak about issues and they heard what I value. And then there are people who heard those very same things and decided that is not the guy I want to vote for. I know that Cleveland Heights is not a monolith. No community is. Some are more monolithic than others. But I wanted to point something out, and some mention of party was had earlier, and I wanted to point out that this is not necessarily. I mean, It is, of course, because we have majorly bipartisan sort of system, but this isn't an issue that necessitates some sort of classification by party. There are people who are to the left of me, to the right of me, who have no use whatsoever for the Democratic Party. And there are people to the left of me and to the right of me who may be all for localities having no part whatsoever in federal immigration enforcement. So I wanted to make it clear that A, this is not necessarily a partisan issue, but B, also I need to recognize that there are people in Cleveland Heights who simply do not agree with the legislation that I proposed. They believe that there should be a hard line, and no matter who you are, whether you're MS-13 or you are somebody who is employing thousands of people, if you broke that law, there's a punishment, there's a consequence, and no exceptions, no mercy. If you're the low-hanging fruit, well, then you're just the low-hanging fruit. I get that people have that value system. I don't happen to share that value system. Probably the people that voted for me don't share that value system. And my understanding of Cleveland Heights is that the majority of Cleveland Heights residents don't share that punitive value system. And that's why I introduced the legislation that I did. That's why I hope that it gets support on council. That's why if it does get passed by council, I hope that it does not go to a referendum and get overturned by the residents of Cleveland Heights. I believe that it reflects the values that we are not in the business of adding to the harm of our community, and that the way that these laws are written and the way that these laws are being enforced does exactly that. And we should not have any part in the decimation of families and businesses that have contributed to our economy. And that's why I introduced that legislation, with the recognition that not everybody shares my value system, but this is a discussion about values, and I believe that Cleveland Heights has the values that would protect the vulnerable as opposed to demonizing and deporting.
Yeah.
Thank you. So with that, I want to congratulate all of you for coming out tonight to become more informed about these issues that we've talked about. There were some other questions that we didn't have time to address. A lot of people were interested in learning more about how is it that local police officers could be doing the work of federal ICE agents. I encourage you to Google something called 287G. Learn more about these policies. Look at the executive orders that came out. You can go on the White House webpage and look at every executive order that's come out since the administration started. You don't have to just rely on what comes on at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. on the TV, and I know that this group doesn't. But this is just one vehicle for becoming more informed. I hope that you will take up Ms. Tramonte's recommendations on how you can get involved, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you again to the League of Women Voters and to our awesome panel tonight for all of their expertise and knowledge.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe get your daughter too. She can provide the youthful component.
yeah.
Where's the youth? Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
The youth right there. We're starting them early, real early.
So you have a long drive back, huh?
Oh,